Is that all right? Let's hear.
Yeah,
Are
that's
you
fine.
sure?
That's good, yeah.
No glares. This is going to be new, inshallah. Hopefully good. Bismillah. So I'm looking at a photo from 1889 about a more peaceful time in Palestine. But I'm wondering whether those Ottoman soldiers could have ever envisioned what the future holds. You see, within 30 years, they'd see the Ottoman Caliphate defeated in World War I, the Sykes-Picot Agreement that saw the Muslim world carved up between France and Britain, and they would eventually see the fall and the abolishment of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. Could they have imagined that the very Masjid al-Aqsa that they are guarding would eventually be occupied by the Zionists? Or even that the Palestinians would face decades of suffering, occupation, with Palestinians in Gaza Strip facing a genocide. So here I investigate why the Caliphate still haunts the West, and why and how they prevent its return. To help me with this video, I've been speaking to a number of experts from different backgrounds, from understanding history to understanding the current political and military situation, as well as economics, and understanding the Islamic basis and discussion around the topic of the Caliphate. This is Dr. Abdul Wahid, who studied and has given many lectures on the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate.
Predominantly, the Ottoman state, the Ottoman Khilafah, was the dominant power in the Eurasian continent for hundreds of years. It dominated over Europe. It opened Constantinople in 1453. It reached the gates of Vienna in 1683. It was civilizationally more advanced than Europe.
He makes the point that the Caliphate was a multi-continental political power covering vast lands from parts of North Africa, Europe, Middle East, and whose presence was felt across even South Asia and Southeast Asia. For centuries, the most dominant political power on the global stage was the Uthmani Khilafah. For instance, the photo of the Ottoman soldiers guarding Masjid al-Aqsa I showed you earlier, that was Palestine as a province, part of the province of the Uthmani Khilafah. Palestine, like many other Muslim lands, were under the authority of a central Islamic leadership called the Caliphate, or Khilafah in Arabic. The Khilafah and the various dynasties has not only been intimately bound by the history and development of the Muslim world, but it's also influenced the West too, even if this history has been largely erased.
And the Ottoman Khilafah stood at that crossroads between Europe and Asia, and to some extent Europe and Africa. When Napoleon targeted Egypt, it was a wake-up call to all of Europe, to the significance of the Ottoman Khilafah and where it stood. That geographical location affected how Europe engaged with it.
You had the multi-continental political power that connected trade between the East and the West. Most famous was the Silk Road, a network of ancient trade routes that connected China to Europe, actually crossed through the Muslim lands. Sea routes bypassed Muslim shorelines like those entering the Mediterranean, or maritime trade towards India. The Muslim world under the Caliphate enjoyed a geostrategic position in the world which was unique, and that obviously concerned Europe, particularly during its colonial expansion in the 18th and 19th century. But European powers didn't just see the Caliphate as standing in the way of economic dominance, nor in the concerns of their westward expansion, but there was a fundamental difference that the West saw with regards to the Caliphate and what it actually represented.
And that came out a lot in the language in the late 1800s, and the liberals like Gladstone, who very much saw the challenge from the Ottomans not purely in terms of power, material power, but also in terms of an ideological discussion.
The Khilafah represented a different civilization built on a different and unique worldview, unique and distinct from the West. Adnan Khan, founder of the think tank Geopolitics, broke it down.
So yes, Islam is a civilization, and like any civilization, it will challenge and compete with other civilizations. So Islam has its own Aqidah, has its own way of life, defines for people their purpose of life, defines what's morally right, what's morally wrong. So it's a completely different way for society, for an economy, for governance.
As European powers moved away from church authority, they built a secular worldview, placing individual freedom, material pursuit, and detachment from religion at the core of their system. But contrast Islam, through the Khilafah, proclaimed that life's ultimate purpose is to submit to the Creator. This meant everything, whether related to personal matters or from governance, economics, law, everything was to align with divine guidance. When Muslims say sovereignty belongs to the Sharia, they mean that God's guidance governs not just prayers and fasting, but society itself, its laws, its economy, its leadership.
So the Islamic civilization will be very different to the materialistic and wealth-centric and individualistic-centric civilization that we have currently.
Therefore, there's a clear ideological difference. The threat that the Caliphate represented was not just in politics, military, or economics, but it also represented a different civilization, a different world view. But wait, I think we've just gone ahead of ourselves in this video. Surely we need to be clear as to what the Caliphate really is. Here I asked Dr. Safaruk Chowdhury, a lecturer in Arabic language and Islamic studies, who also studied at Al-Azhar University, this very question.
Unity under a caliphate means the political leadership of the entire global Muslim Ummah. So the entire nation of Islam is brought under a single legitimate authority in the form of what is known as the Caliph or the Khalifa in Arabic. This Caliph will govern by the Quran and the Sunnah.
See, two key factors come out from his points. The first is that the Khilafah represents a political leadership of the Muslim world. He's not just a figurehead or a religious leader like the Pope is to the Catholics, but he holds real political power, implements laws, appoints governors, organizes armed forces, everything that a political leader does. Secondly, that the political authority of the Khilafah will implement the rulings of the Quran and the Sunnah. Therefore, his policies will be within the boundaries of what Islam mandates, recommends, or even deems permissible. Dr. Safaruk further explains.
Now, as I understand it, the unity here doesn't mean unanimity. In other words, everyone who's a citizen under this institution, this leadership, it doesn't mean every citizen agrees on everything. It doesn't even mean every citizen conforms to everything. Rather, it means that the leadership under which an Islamic governance or political authority is established is singular and is unifying.
The Khilafah represents political unity. But any keen reader in Islamic history may remark that apart from the period of the Khulafa Rashidin, the rightly guided caliphs, the Muslim world rarely unified under one Khalifa. However, what the Khilafah represents is a clear, unified Muslim world. Even the Ottoman Caliphate, as I mentioned earlier, spanned across different continents. Its very existence meant that even Muslims under colonial rule would still see the Khilafah, the Ottoman Caliphate, as its real leadership. The Khilafah movement in India in the 19th century is a case in point. They sought to resist British colonial rule by advocating for India to be unified with the Ottoman Caliphate.
The West, I think, have been very insistent on dismantling Islamic unity. They've considered the notion of a caliphate, this global Muslim sort of power, as a kind of threat to their own political, economic, territorial interests.
Therefore, Western colonial powers definitely saw the presence of the caliphate as a direct threat to the hegemony, whether in terms of ideological, economic, or military. The caliphate, in essence, was not just an alternative civilization, but was a competitor as to which civilization can establish itself as a dominant power in the world. That meant European colonial powers set about developing plans and strategies to weaken and even bring down the Khilafah.
Much of that influx of secular and nationalistic thought did come from an agenda from the West, whether it's from missionaries or political or diplomatic influences or educational institutions. There was a very deliberate attempt to infiltrate and spread thoughts which were going to create schisms, and then later where there was political assaults and military assaults trying to stir up war in provinces in the Balkans, or later on during the World War I period where they were trying to incite an Arab revolt, you can see that those schisms existed, and the intellectual resilience from Islam to resist that was not there throughout the whole society.
Dr. Abdul Wahid outlines 4 points. Firstly, internal decline in Muslim thought due to complacency and stagnation. Secondly, Western ideological infiltration, promoting nationalism and secularism to fragment Muslim identity. Thirdly, rebellion, funded uprisings like the Arab Revolt, stoked with nationalistic rhetoric. Fourthly, military defeat. The Ottomans lost in World War I, sealing the deal.
Once the war was actually lost by the Ottomans, the Allied powers set about doing exactly that, first in the Treaty of Sèvres and later in the Treaty of Lausanne, where effectively they stripped the Ottoman state of all control over all its lands outside of what is modern-day Turkey. So the entire Middle East, whether it's Bilad al-Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, Hijaz, North Africa, all of this became lost from the control of the Ottomans. And the victorious powers in World War I set up carving up the region between different players in Europe and appointing their own proxy governments who were loyal to them, whether they were kings or whether it was republics. They were looking to colonize these lands politically and intellectually, and that's effectively what they have done.
You see, I think this is really interesting. Not only did we see the colonization of Muslim lands infiltrating the minds of Muslims with nationalistic and secular ideas, but we saw the West literally draw the maps of the Muslim world. You know, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can see that there is literally straight lines between countries. Libya, Egypt, Sudan, they were drawn with rulers. Syria, Jordan, Iraq, again, straight lines. The border between Pakistan and Afghanistan is called the Durand Line, named after Sir Mortimer Durand, a British Indian government official. But they weren't just happy with that, with drawing the maps of the nation states of the Muslim lands. Seeing the destruction of the Caliphate, they also placed the very rulers of these newly created Muslim states as well. But this isn't just about history, the desire to prevent the re-emergence of the Caliphate, a unified Islamic world. It is also an active policy today.
These colonial powers maintain their control over the former Ottoman lands through a variety of means. The governments in those countries have either been established or nurtured or groomed by these colonial countries to either stay directly loyal to their patrons in the West, as an example, Jordan, or to stay within the framework, the international framework, which restricts their actions in the international arena to act only in accordance with the policies set by the great world power. The other is economic control through trade, economic control through aid, economic control through the World Bank and IMF, economic control where the dollar has become the dominant reserve currency, which means that they are subject to the fluctuations of the American economy. The third thing, military control in some places. You have US Air Force bases in places like Qatar. We had US occupation directly in Iraq. Probably the most damaging is intellectual control. We should not underestimate how much the West managed to infiltrate the intellectual life and thought of the Muslim world, whether it's directly through educational institutions in the Muslim countries, whether it's through the global media, whether it's through the elite of the Muslim world traveling to the West to be educated. And if you couple that to the decline in Islamic thought over decades and centuries, you can see how possible it has been to colonize the mind of the political class, the intellectual class in the Muslim world.
Wow, it's really a sophisticated system of control. Groom rulers of the Muslim world, tie countries to Western economies, place Western military bases in the heart of the Muslim lands. If a government or leader departs from the agenda of the West, then either remove them through coups or invade and occupy them directly, all the while selling secular nationalistic ideas to the Muslim world. You see, the very same concerns that the West had over 100 years ago still remain concerns for today. In fact, I would say that the concerns have actually amplified. Abu Zakarriya is an associate professor of economics in London.
So I think it's important to add as well that, the caliphate is not a threat simply because of, let's say, ideological reasons, but also because of some hard facts of economics and even geography. The Muslim world sits on an enormous concentration of very strategic resources. To give some examples, Saudi, for example, holds probably around 18% last I checked, of the world's oil reserves. Qatar has like the third largest natural gas reserves, trillions of cubic meters worth of natural gas. Kazakhstan has a significant amount of uranium deposits, right? Significant interests to superpowers. Tanzania is rich in rare earth. Parts of India are even rich in rare earth minerals. And all of these are really, really important for, technological progress, but also just generally in terms of hard power.
Oil, gas, coal, rare earth minerals, uranium metal ore are critical strategic resources that modern economies rely upon. Whoever controls these resources controls the global economy. And these are abundant in the Muslim world. Remember how in the 19th century colonial powers were concerned with the caliphate being situated in the heart of global trade routes. Nothing has changed with regards to this.
And of course there's geography as well, if you think about it. If you look at the trade routes in the world, so the major global trade routes, for instance, whether it be, if you think about the Suez Canal, the Straits of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandab, all of these types of routes, they run directly through or even alongside Muslim countries, right? And these are some of the most important checkpoints, I would say, for global trade, for global shipping, right? And because of course most trade occurs in that form of transport. So those who control these types of choke points, let's say, they don't just influence economic trade, but they can even reshape the global supply chain.
So you have the Muslim world with key strategic resources is also geostrategically located within global trade routes. Effectively, these two factors alone could result in the Muslim world controlling world trade. Add to the vast lands of the Muslims and a population of 2 billion, it represents a threat to the current global order run by Western elites. But it doesn't even just stop there. Islam, as I mentioned, doesn't just provide guidance for personal acts of worship, but also provides a unique economic system, one that differs from the West.
I mean, any system that seeks to do even a fraction of the things that I've set out in some of your questions, is not to be treated lightly. I mean, it presents a serious alternative to the US-led order on a global scale. And this is something that would concern superpowers of the world. I mean, from abolishing fiat as a monetary system and returning to a bimetallic system, to creating new deals that strategically allow a level playing field within global finance, for instance, to seizing wealth from the corrupt elite and redistributing it to the people. Islam is going to be challenging the status quo that the people, not the ruling class or the elite, have actually grown to hate in any case and loathe, right?
Can you imagine a unified Muslim world that usurped the dollar as the international currency for trade and instead used the bimetallic standard, meaning trading oil, gas or rare earth minerals using gold and silver backed currency? It would change the economic global order. Abu Zakarriya notes that the West may place economic sanctions against any future caliphate.
And there are plenty of examples in history where sanctions levied by the superpower at the time on its rivals did not lead to its demise. There are examples even today where this is the case. And in fact, many have alternatively created new markets, which have caused them to grow even more powerful than they were when they depended on, let's say, the US or rival states for the purchase of their produce, right?
Yes, sanctions against small nationalistic entities in the Muslim world might work, but a significantly unified Muslim world, one that incorporates oil and gas-rich Gulf countries. They tried a similar approach with Russia, but rather than breaking Russia, it transformed Russian economy, where they broke away from being dependent upon Western export markets. But really, the West would be shooting itself in its own foot. It's not that the Muslim world relies on the West for wealth, but actually the West relies on the Muslim world itself. You know, we've actually seen this recently with Trump traveling to the Gulf countries, desperate to extract trillions of dollars worth of investment. These are countries with massive sovereign wealth funds, whereas America is an indebted country to the tune of $36 trillion. So who has the real strength here economically? And it's just obvious speaking to Abu Zakarriya. You have massive amounts of resources, oil, gas, coal, uranium, rare earths, a capable and young workforce, massive amounts of arable land, control over the trade routes, together with a unique and distinct economic system that works to circulate the wealth throughout the society, not to allow it to be hoarded just by a tiny elite. So why isn't this being done? But wait, I know what will be said. The West's military bases throughout the Muslim world and the West's military technological superiority just would not allow it. They would prevent the Muslim world unifying and re-establishing the Caliphate, becoming this economic giant within the world.
The armed forces across the Muslim world, if you start combining them, they are absolutely huge. You look at Pakistan, you look at Egypt, you look at Turkey, you look at Indonesia. These are countries that have armed forces, the active forces and reserves over 1 million. If you start combining the Gulf countries and other armies, we're looking up to 5 million troops. You start combining their tanks, you start combining their fighter jets, you start combining their artillery. This is a huge force that NATO can only dream of actually being. So the army, if it's one army, would be absolutely huge. And this would force anyone really to rethink interfering in the Muslim lands.
What Adnan mentions is that the Muslim world in terms of armed forces is just simply absolutely massive, and that the West isn't this all-powerful entity. The key here is working to unify the Muslim world, not only unifies the armies, but creates strategic depth. Of those current Western military bases stationed in the Muslim world, Adnan explains this.
So these military bases really are stepping stones for foreign interference, so they need to go. In fact, these bases need electricity, they need to be fueled, the troops on them need to be fed, the equipment needs to be maintained. So all of this makes these bases reliant upon the host country where the Muslim rulers are today. So these military bases really are supply lines for our enemies. So they need to be cut, and actually these bases need to be used to defend and protect the Muslim lands, to protect the borders, and to ensure no one can actually attack the Caliphate or the Muslim lands.
The wars, the invasions, the occupations over Muslim lands, the ethnic cleansings we've witnessed, including in Gaza right now, unifying the Muslim world would not only unify the current armies of the Muslim world, but unify the industries, expertise to create a highly modern and efficient armed forces, one that would effectively intervene to protect human life.
There's synergies if you unify the different Muslim armies. You've got lots of ground troops, you've got other countries with lots of air assets. When you combine these, this now means they can stop genocides taking place. They can intervene when foreign interference takes place, and actually you can defend the Muslim Ummah around the world. For the moment, because these armies are behind nationalistic lines, the advantages that they bring can't be brought to bear on the battlefield. So by unifying them, you can now protect the Ummah, you can protect the borders, and you can protect from foreign interference.
You see, the more I understand why the West opposes the Caliphate, the more I realize how incredibly important it is to the Muslims today. You know, it seems absolutely obvious, but why then there is so little discussion about it? Why isn't the Khilafah and the call for unity of the Muslim world the most prominent call amongst Muslims today? As Dr. Safaruk mentioned, the Khilafah isn't just a beneficial thing, it's a religious obligation too.
And in fact, the other point I would say, this is reflected in all of the Imams of the madahib, that there must be an imam. It's unthinkable for there to be an imam. لا يحل لأحد أن يبيت ليلة ولا يرى أن ليس عليه إمام برا كان أو فاجر. هكذا قال Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. It is not allowed, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal said, rahimahullah, it's not allowed for anyone to spend a night considering themselves free of being ruled over an imam, regardless of whether the imam, that leader, that caliph, him personally is morally upright or corrupted. Yeah.
So then why isn't this call to re-establish the Khilafah more prominent today?
For several reasons. One is oppression. Put it plain and simply, the regimes in the Muslim world don't tolerate a discussion about a caliphate system because Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. There is a lot of repression on people who talk about Khilafah and Islam as an alternative system of governance, an alternative civilization for the Muslim world.
One, political pressure, right? So many Muslim majority countries, unfortunately, if you speak openly about the caliphate, it can be very costly. It's dangerous. There are, immense legal restrictions. Many scholars fear being branded not only as extremists, but they face repercussions from state authorities that can result in arrest, threats to life, and even death.
It makes sense. The very rulers, states and systems in the Muslim world were created and groomed by the West. So then what better way than use these rulers to repress any call for Khilafah, stop it from becoming a popular call, stop the Islamic political movements that would call for a caliphate and seek to unify the Muslim world. It's interesting, any discussion of the caliphate tends to be met by at least some Muslims with either it's impractical, brother, it's not the time, the world has moved on, it's an impossible task. It's like we've been trained to automatically think that the Khilafah means impracticality, means backwardness, it couldn't be applied today. Or on the other hand, it's being perceived as being extreme. It's at the very least, as Dr. Safaruk puts it, a dangerous idea.
They want to establish a global caliphate and impose their harsh version of Sharia or Islamic law on the people.
They seek to establish a radical Islamic caliphate so they can impose a brutal new order on unwilling people.
So they believe that it's their job to stand up for an Islamic society against what the United States is trying to do.
So even those who would accept the caliphate as normative part of Islam, those who even believe in the idea as a good thing, they've been trained to associate the idea of a unified Muslim world under a caliphate, under an Islamic political leadership, as dangerous and or impractical for our day and age. But as Dr. Safaruk explains, this is by design, this idea. Part of the colonial culturing was to make the Muslims reject the concept of the caliphate.
So some of the ways in which I think the notion of a caliphate, is problematized by sort of the West is either to make the idea unpalatable, to make the idea dangerous, because one of the ways when you make an idea unpalatable is it no longer seems to have any resonance. So if an idea is made unpalatable for our time, then you no longer see it as relevant. If you make the concept dangerous, then the likely outcome is people disassociate something that is connected to a dangerous idea. So the way the caliphate is being depicted as being backwards, barbaric, and medieval, people often don't want to be associated with things that give the impression of regression, of going backwards. Western media, Western politicians, Western thinkers would so readily, so quickly associate one with the other. It's a way to defeat the idea as well, right? I talked about how one way you want to try and defeat an idea is to make it dangerous, is to make it unstickable.
Connect the Islamic noble concept of the caliphate with barbaric, murderous group. But it has to be clear that the attempt to malign the caliphate isn't about fears of terrorism, but fears of an independent and unified Muslim world.
But the real threat, I think, to these sort of Western neo-imperial interests is not terrorism per se, but it's this independent and unified Islamic political entity that again could challenge global injustice, economic domination and injustice. And it's that threat, I think, that motivates the association of the caliphate with chaos and violence and the perpetuation of these media narratives to try and delegitimize the core foundational Islamic institution in the eyes of both the non-Muslims and Muslims. So I think that's the real purpose.
What began with a question of a century-old photograph ended up revealing more than I expected. The Khilafah isn't just a relic of Islamic history, it's a living, breathing threat to the current world order. Not because it seeks wars, but because it presents a unified, independent, value-based alternative to the crumbling global system built on exploitation. The West's fear is our forgotten strength, and perhaps it's time we stopped forgetting.